So reasons which people give, first of all, there's speed. It's a very expedient place in which to inject. People talk about going in seconds. It's in and out. I've done my business, which obviously is quite important if veins are beginning to deteriorate or it's taking 20, 30 minutes, perhaps even longer to try and find a vein. If that is, the injector is preferring to actually fix a hit into a vein rather than skin pop as an alternative. And most we speak to would prefer not to skin pop. So once having got to the point of really finding difficulty hitting a vein somewhere else in the body, either because it's difficult to get to or they just can't get it in, then the groin offers that sure shot, if you like. It's quick and it's pretty much guaranteed that once the groin has been found as a place of injection, users largely speak about it being a vein which one can go in and out of very quickly and repeatedly and for a long time. That obviously varies, because that's not true for all injectors. So speed, expediency are two factors. Another factor we hear about is that it's discreet. It's not so visible or obvious if you're doing your groin that it is if you're doing your arms or other parts of your legs, for example. And that reason also has kind of a certain amount of, or is more important perhaps for those that are either street drug users or homeless drug users, where they may be more likely to inject in public settings, either in the street or in off-street situations, where going in and out quickly with a guaranteed hit is all quite important, whereas by comparison, it might be cold, it might be difficult to find a vein. You don't want to be doing that in a semi-public place with the fear of being interrupted either by the police or by other users, when going to the groin is just so much easier and quicker. Another factor we've heard in the qualitative interviews as to why people are doing the groin is that it's a better hit, which we didn't cover in the paper we just had published in the International Journal of Drug Policy. The rationale here being that it's a big vein and it's closer to your brain, so you're going to feel the full impact of the rush more than you would if it was in a smaller vein or somewhere else. Now, I don't know how much of this is mythology, but it's interesting nonetheless how many speedball injectors we've spoken to do talk about the groin as providing a bigger and better hit. So all those are kind of very rational, I think, reasons which we're hearing for why people may choose to do the groin, and reasons also which people give for why they're doing it when they consider it necessary, when they run out of veins and so on. But I still think there's this idea that it's become socially acceptable. You also hear people talk about, well, I don't want to be in a group situation where everyone around me is in and out, they've done their groins, they've had their hits, and I'm left fumbling in a corner trying to find a vein for 20 minutes, 30 minutes. They're up and out, they're off grafting, on to the next thing. I'm kind of being left behind. So we've heard a lot of that kind of account, which I think does speak to the idea that it's considered more normal to do the groin, and therefore a little outside not to do it, and everybody else is doing it, so I may as well too. People also talk about one of the factors why they didn't do groins as being this issue about privacy, because it is a private place, and but that seems to have changed. It seems to me that injectors, for whatever reason, are now far more comfortable at doing their groins in semi-public environments, even public environments, with other injectors around. So again, I think that indicates a certain amount of social acceptability now about the groin being an okay place to inject. So I think these things taken together, I suppose what I would argue is that groin injecting is not simply an outcome of a linear progression of having had all your veins deteriorate and ending up there, but it's more kind of a situational response to the particular circumstances people are in, whether that's being homeless, whether that's doing crack, whether that's doing drugs with other people that do groins, where some people now will do the groin by preference even if they've got other veins, which even in their arms, which they could use. So you do find cases of people almost starting off by doing the groins. I mean, that's a bit of an exaggeration, but that nonetheless make the transition to groin injection quite early on in their career.
I've come across a few who have started off.
Yeah, no, we have too,
Yeah.
and including young injectors that, in terms of veins, have no reason to do the groin, but are doing the groin, and they're all doing it.
I've seen it in
by
young
preference.
people. I've also seen it where people are joining a group, and that's what the group are doing. It's pretty much what you said before.
Sure.
So it's what they're shown how to do, which is a bit.
That's right. I mean, I think that's why even if the quantitative data, or we don't have the quantitative data to with confidence say there's increased prevalence of groin injection among UK injectors, I think there's enough qualitative evidence to illustrate the kind of thing that you're talking about, that it is more, it's more of a normal thing to do. If half of injectors in many metropolitan centres, let's say, it's not all, are doing the groin as their main or as a regular site of injecting in England or in the UK, then I think it would be foolish to ignore the injecting site as a major issue of concern for harm reduction advice. I'm aware it's a delicate issue, in that the groin does carry risks associated with it that other veins do not. I mean, injectors know that too. But if it is becoming the norm, or in some cities the norm, if not the majority of injectors doing it, then I think it would be crazy not to recognise that more harm reduction advice needs to be given to this issue, including potentially, and this is probably where it gets a little bit more delicate, among injectors that are fairly new to injecting. And that's an interesting question as to how you manage that. I mean, you mentioned it yourself. We're finding it also, I don't know to what extent, we don't know, but it is the case that some younger injectors are doing the groin by preference. And we're hearing that the kind of advice that injectors are getting in relation to groins and how best to risk manage the groin injection are not coming so much from formal resources or services, if you like, but from other users and or from doctors, where injectors have specifically sought out doctors to seek advice on how best to do a groin injection. So most injectors we've spoken to have been shown how to groin inject, or to find their femoral vein, if you like, through another injector. And we've asked them to recall back the kind of advice they got at that time when they first tried their first groin injection. And it does vary, let's say, in terms of the quality of advice they've received. So that is a gap. You know, if people are doing the groin by preference, or even if not by preference, if at least half of injectors are doing it, then I think it needs to have more visibility in current harm reduction advice in terms of how to inject safely. At the moment, it seems a little bit behind closed doors as a potentially delicate area, which may be spoken about to some injectors if it becomes apparent that they're doing the groin. And that may not be enough.
So you think we should be more open about it?
I think it would be perhaps strange not to be more open about groin injecting if half of injectors are doing it. It would be a bit strange if harm reduction workers were being less open about groin injecting than injectors themselves. Maybe it would be easier for people that are doing the groin to talk about doing the groin if there was a perceived acceptability of talking about it within the context of a harm reduction service, and not only it being a perceived acceptable thing to do in terms of doing a drug. So, I mean, I don't know to what extent, I haven't asked injectors this actually, so I don't know to what extent injectors find it difficult to bring up issues of groin injecting in the context of a harm reduction service. But certainly, yeah, if half of injectors are doing it, if that is true, and our surveys would suggest it is, in the bigger UK cities at least, then it would be strange not to make it a more visible issue of discussion.